Greetings. My name is Dr. Waddell Brooks, Sr., your host, and this is Community Focus. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an outstanding guest with us in the studio this morning, Attorney Erick Reinhart. He's a Democratic candidate of a Lake County State's Attorney. He is a person that you should know. Good morning, Attorney Reinhart.
Good morning, Dr. Brooks. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, we're very happy that you're taking time from your very busy schedule to come down to the studio to be with us on Community Focus and talk to the citizens of Lake County. As you probably know, Lake County is approximately 750,000 people, but I don't know how many up at 5 o'clock this Sunday morning listen to the program, but I understand we have a pretty good audience, though, especially those who are getting ready to go to church and so forth. I would like for you to tell our listening audience first a little bit about your personal and professional background.
Of course, thank you. So I grew up in downstate Illinois. My parents are teachers. They're retired now. They were members of the church there, and I was a member of the church, the United Methodist Church, growing up in a small town. I went to college over in Knox College, which is in the western part of the state, a small liberal arts school.
Oh, yes.
And then from there, I went to the University of Chicago Law School, graduated from the University of Chicago Law School in 2001, and worked downtown Chicago for a little while at a civil practice. I learned a great work ethic there, an attention to detail, learned that every second kind of counts when you're working on a legal case, and every idea counts, and that there's no detail that is too small. And I did that for a couple years, but my real passion was in criminal law. While I was at the University of Chicago Law School, I worked with Randolph Stone and Herschella Conyers, who were former Cook County public defenders, but I worked at a legal aid clinic there, and we gave a great deal of assistance to people in the Hyde Park neighborhood, the south side of Chicago. Of course, the University of Chicago is on the south side, and we worked a lot with the communities there to give them free legal representation at 26 in California in Cook County. And so that was where my real passion had been in law school. And so after a couple years at the civil firm to help pay the bills and help them pay the student loans, I went to the Lake County Public Defender's Office, and I've been up here in Lake County since 2003. So that's my sort of journey from downstate Illinois all the way to Waukegan. I started on, I still remember the day, June 3rd, 2003. I started at the Lake County Public Defender's Office, and I've been fighting for the people ever since then.
Tell me this, you mentioned downstate Illinois. I'm from downstate Illinois too, though, so what part?
Danville. A little town of Catlin near Danville, Illinois.
Oh, yeah, I'm from East St. Louis.
Okay.
Further south.
Yeah.
But I went to Illinois State, and with quite a few students from Danville coming over to Illinois State.
Oh yeah, Danville. Yeah, Danville's a great town. It's had some people move from Danville out to Hollywood. We have some famous actors from there that we tout from Danville, and it's a very nice and diverse community for downstate Illinois. You have a lot of small towns, but Danville's about 40,000 people, and it's a great place.
And also, you're near Peoria?
Well, we're not too far from Peoria, but when I went to college, I'd have to drive from Danville through Peoria to get to Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, which is about the same size as Danville.
Oh, yes. Well, tell us, what piqued your interest in the legal profession?
So, in high school, I certainly enjoyed the sort of debate parts of any curriculum that we had, and in college, I actually was very involved in student government, and that led me to sort of get involved in how students were being treated in colleges. And it occurred to me that good people that are trying to do the right thing can sometimes do the wrong thing in our court systems, and it can sometimes do the wrong thing in our institutions, and that we need people really paying attention to those less empowered, and to make sure that they are being protected. And so when I was in college, through the judicial board and some of the student organizations, I saw that the college administration was full of good people, but they made some mistakes in how they treated some students in those processes. So I got very involved in helping people in that way, and that's how I became a defense attorney, was to help the little guy. And to be honest, Dr. Brooks, I see this campaign for state's attorney to be part of that journey for me, to be part of that process, which is to help people who need help. And the people who need help in our society are the victims of crimes, and they are people who are not being paid attention to in our court system. And to be honest, they're also people who are wrongfully accused of crimes. They're people who are suffering from addiction or mental health, or they're people who are being arrested by the police wrongly. Those are the people that need help in our society right now. And it's that same mindset of helping people who are less powerful that I want to take from my work as a defense attorney to the state's attorney's office.
Fantastic. Well, you're a candidate now for Lake County State's Attorney. What are the duties of a state's attorney?
So the state's attorney is the elected attorney for all of the people in Lake County, and that's very important to me. And I hope we can talk about this for a little bit. It's very important to me that the people realize how important this position is, and I can go through some of the specific duties, but I want to start by illustrating an example. This summer, the current Lake County State's Attorney decided to charge 5 African American youth with murder when a homeowner shot one of them because they were out in his driveway, probably attempting to rob him or steal his car or rob from his car, and he shot one of them. And he wasn't charged with anything, but the other 5 were charged with murder. And the reason I start with that story is because it illustrates the discretion that prosecutors have. And I don't think people really understand that. And I want to talk about it for a minute. It's so important that the prosecutor that we have in our county is connected with all of the communities in our county, is connected with those less powerful, is connected with the people who need help. Because the decisions that a prosecutor makes are so important. It's not simply applying what he or she sees as the law and then signing some paperwork. You have to make a decision about how to bring charges, and you have to have the right brain and you have to have the right heart in making those decisions. And that's why I'm running for state's attorney, because I don't think the right decisions are being made with the brain or with the heart when it comes to representing people and fighting for people. I've been a fighter for 16 years. I've been fighting for my clients, whether they were in the public defender's office or later when I became a private attorney, and we could talk a little more about that. I left the public defender's office in 2009 to start my own practice, but I've been fighting for people really since 2003. And even my practice, in my private practice, has been exclusively focused on criminal law. We'll do a little bit of civil cases, maybe 1 or 2 a year. So 1 or 2 a year is about 0.1% of our time. But I've been fighting for people in the courts here for 16 years, and I've seen the current state's attorney's office, and some of that is before my opponent, my general election opponent. Some of that is predates him, and we can talk a little more about that. But for those 16 years, I've watched this state's attorney's office use its discretion badly. And so I want to take a few minutes to talk about how the prosecutors have to make a decision, for example, whether to charge those 5 unarmed juveniles, 1 was an adult, 4 were juveniles, whether to charge those unarmed juveniles with murder because a homeowner killed one of their group. That discretion was a mistake. And I've put this up on my website. You can go to reinhartforlakecounty.com and read my full statement on it. And it's what I believed in August when I published it, and it's what I still believe today. So certainly people can go to that website and look at that. But I start with talking about discretion because I think most people believe that a prosecutor is simply enforcing the law. Now, enforcing the law is the number one job of the prosecutor's office, but the discretion you exercise in that murder case, or whether or not you're going to charge a driving on revoked as a felony or a misdemeanor, whether you're going to charge a retail theft as a felony or a misdemeanor, whether you're going to charge somebody suffering from drug addiction with a misdemeanor or a felony, that is discretion that we've had for hundreds of years from our prosecutors, and it's discretion that's not being exercised correctly now, but it is something that I will bring to this office, and it's going to be my heart and my brain that I've been that I'm going to bring to those discretionary decisions. And frankly, everything is a discretionary decision. I've talked a little bit about charging decisions, but also what offers to make people. And when I say offer, I'm talking about a plea bargaining. As most of your listeners probably know, most criminal cases are resolved with a plea bargain. They're not resolved with a trial. I think I've done maybe the most trials of anybody my age. I'm 43. I think I've done the most trials of anybody of my age in this county, certainly for a defense attorney. But it's not really the practice is mostly about plea bargains. And so the offer that a prosecutor will make, should we send this person to prison or should we give this person a chance at probation? That's discretion. That's not in a law book. You don't read that in a statute one day. I didn't go to law school to say, oh, well, you've been down to prison once, you can never get probation again. And that's a little bit how our prosecutor's office looks at things. And so it's that discretion that I think is critical for your listeners to know about. So it's those decisions that this election is going to be about in November. I'm not opposed in the primary. I hope your voters will go out, I hope your listeners will go out and vote on March 17th or earlier in the primary. But my election against my opponent, the current state's attorney, will be in November. So the state's attorney has the discretion in all of those criminal areas, but he or she is also the attorney for the county. He or she is the attorney for all of the legal issues that may come up in a county's life, in a community's life. Environmental issues are very important to me. Labor issues are very important to me. Immigration issues are very important to me. The current state's attorney isn't showing any leadership in those areas. I think the state's attorney should have a prominent role in those labor issues, those environmental issues, those immigration issues. The state's attorney is also the attorney for the county board. A lot of people may not know this. The state's attorney has to give legal advice to the county board. Currently, our county board is a majority Democratic, but the state's attorney right now is a Republican. And so his legal advice may be different, may be slanted from what the county board needs. The county board has a right to have a lawyer. They have a right to have somebody advocating for them about how to get through the laws and the regulations. And it's important that the county board, which is majority Democratic, also has a Democratic voice or somebody who shares the values of the Democratic Party advising them. And I don't see that as a partisan issue. I see that as just the board from a procedural perspective. The county board should be able to select its own attorney. And so anyway, these issues for the county board, the environment, labor issues are very important to me. The state's attorney is the attorney for all the people, whether we're talking about victims in the courtroom or whether we're talking about people in their homes. The state's attorney should be fighting for them. And I've been fighting for my clients, and I'm going to fight for the people of Lake County on these important issues.
Well, tell us this. You're licensed to practice in Illinois, the U.S. District Courts of Northern District of Illinois and the Northern District of Indiana, right?
That's correct. Yes, I had one case when I was at the law firm where we represented a client that was in Indiana, so I had to be authorized there. I had to be authorized. I've practiced a little bit in federal court. I got to advocate for my client, Curtis, in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a federal appeals court. He was charged with possessing a drug, a very small amount of drug, but he got this terrible sentence from the federal courts, and so I was able to successfully advocate for him. And I've also gotten to represent a teacher in the Supreme Court of Illinois. She was given improper notice procedures regarding some discipline she got, and the notice provisions didn't tell her when she had to file her response. And I argued successfully to the Illinois Supreme Court that the letter that a teacher gets, or really any of us, it wouldn't have to be a teacher, but that the letter that teacher got was not fair to her, that it violated her due process because it didn't tell her the date she had to file her response. We all know when tax day is. We all know when the election is. And there was not a clear statement to her what day she had to file her response. So I was very proud to represent her successfully in the Illinois Supreme Court.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, we're talking with Attorney Erick Reinhart, the Democratic candidate, and Lake County State's Attorney. And Attorney Reinhart, I understand that you magna cum laude at Knox College. You mentioned Galesburg, Illinois, right?
Yeah, I loved my time at Knox. It started. I think it was. I believe it was a Presbyterian school, founded in the 1830s. It has a wonderful history. It served as the site of the as one of the sites of the Lincoln-Douglas debate.
Okay.
Oh, now I'm a little behind on my history here. There were either 6 or 8 or 7 Lincoln-Douglas debates throughout Illinois in I think it's the election of 1848 or 1854. Okay. Anyway, Knox College was a site of one of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. The first day I visited Knox, they had a reenactment of those debates. So I've been kind of a little bit of a Lincoln nerd ever since then.
Now, you started out with a BS in political science. Is this what attorneys start off with?
The great thing about attorneys, about the practice of law, is you can have a major in English, you can have a major in science, you can have if you're interested in environmental issues or biological issues, you can have a degree in any background and then go on to law school. So I went straight from my political science background, had some great professors there, and went straight from that into law school. Some people take time off between college and law school, but I went straight to the University of Chicago.
I mention that because there may be early this morning, high school students may be listening. And what preparation? And you mentioned it could be English or it could be whatever. It doesn't have to be just political science, right?
That's right. And so law schools are looking for well-rounded people. They're looking for hard workers. So I would say to any of our young listeners, work hard. Mm-hmm. Do your extracurricular activities as part of your hard work, but work hard in your classes too. Law schools and colleges want to see that balance from people. They want to see that you can handle a tough schedule. They want to see that you can adapt to a tougher schedule because your schedule gets pretty tough in college. And so I think that any background you have for a law practice is fine. Obviously, most people are doing political stuff, history, English, writing. Most of the people who I went to law school with had a background in political science, history, or English. But in really any field, particularly if people are interested in environmental law, you may want a science background.
One of the questions I always ask, and is about diversity in the state's attorney's office. I know most of the incarcerations are blacks, and other minorities.
So,
right?
Dr. Brooks, that's one of the personal reasons, maybe the top personal reason that I'm running, and I'm really glad you asked this. 7% of our population, as you know, in Lake County is African American, a little bit over 7%.
Okay.
35% of our jail is African American.
Don't white citizens commit crimes?
They do, of course. They do, and the white population of the jail is less than the proportion of white people in the county.
Okay.
And so, why is that? And this is one of the biggest failings of the current state's attorney's office. We have to be able to identify the problem. And the problem that I just identified to you was the incarceration rate of African Americans and Latinos. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if the current state's attorney's office would identify that as a problem. Mm-hmm. If we can't identify it as a problem, we can't fix it. A week ago, or a little more than a week ago, I was at a forum, and I'm not going to name names, but I was at a community forum. The forum was great. It was put on by Anthony McIntyre and Ant Mound, which is a great foundation, which I'm happy to a name to drop. But it was somebody who works in our court systems. That's all I'll say about him. And he said that he didn't think we had a problem with racial decisions or with racism or implicit bias in our decisions about bond.
Amazing.
How can he say that when he knows that the incarceration rate is 35% of our jail? It's about 700 people, 650 people. That 35% of our jail is African American when our population is only 7%. And so in the context of bail reform, I was advocating that we should have a system that doesn't focus on money, but focuses on the safety to the community. If you're a threat to the community, you should be in the jail. If you're not a threat to the community, we shouldn't have you in the jail just because you don't have $500 to post. Okay. So you've brought up diversity and race relations. I don't think we have real accountability with our court system about that racial disparity, and we have to talk about it. And when I'm state's attorney, we're going to identify the causes of this, and we're going to solve it, and we're going to talk about it. And the number one step that I'm going to talk about for the next 7 months in this campaign is that it is a problem. And I think that the fact that the court system and the fact that the state's attorney's office doesn't even acknowledge the problem is terrible, and it shows that we don't have real leadership in the office.
Well, what about in the public defender's office? Of course, that's separate from the state's attorney altogether, right? But we don't even have maybe one or two black public defenders. Yeah, and also on the state's attorney's office, you have, I don't know how many assistant state's attorneys you have, but it's only about maybe 2 or 3 black assistant state's attorneys.
That's right.
There's something wrong there.
That's right. There are currently no supervisors that are African American or Latino in our state's attorney's office. Very few are women. There are a few women supervisors, but they are not the primary divisions of the state's attorney's office are supervised by white men. And in terms of the number of attorneys that are of color in our state's attorney's office, I believe there are 3, and I think there are about 60 to 70 attorneys in the assistant state's attorneys in the office. Now, the overall office has about 100 employees, maybe a little bit less, but I think the number of attorneys is around 60 to 70, and I believe there are only 3 of color. And that has to stop. And I will tell you that. What
about recruiting? Is that
That's what I was about to say.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
I'm sorry. This is your program.
No, it's your program, Dr. Brooks. It's your program. No, that's it. You have to recruit. You have to identify it as a problem.
Okay, first of all.
Does the current state's attorney's office think it's a problem? It is a problem, right? And so the first thing you have to do is be able to identify the problem. And so we would have to recruit. We would want to seek the best legal minds that we could get in the area, and we would go to the law schools are in Chicago. The law schools aren't in Lake County. The law schools are in Chicago. We would go to the law schools in Chicago and seek the best legal minds, but not only the best legal minds, but the people who had an understanding of the needs of our diverse county. And the needs of our diverse county are to make sure that the entire community is protected both from crime. And that's really important to me. People may say, oh, this guy's primarily been a defense lawyer. Well, I got to tell you, primarily as a defense lawyer, I see the current state's attorney's office not fight for victims of color. If you are the victim of a crime and you are of color or you are poorer, you're not going to see this state's attorney's office fight for you, in my opinion. And so that's that's a very important platform for me, is that we protect all communities, regardless of color, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of background, regardless of class. And so I think that's kind of something that we don't talk a lot about. We just say, oh, well, defense attorneys are going to want to give everybody probation. That's not true. I think some people need to go to prison if they're hurting people in our communities. But we have to recognize that some of our communities, our African American and Latino communities in Lake County, are suffering because of the shootings and because of the gang violence. And that's something that I'm going to prioritize through a task force to make sure that we are paying enough attention to those communities.
Time is fleeing, but I'd like to just mention the areas of practice that maybe you've been involved in or maybe you had planned to get involved in. Is that drug crimes, DUI, traffic offenses, juvenile law, expungement. Expungement is a major topic too. I'm
really glad you brought that up, Dr. Brooks. It's very important that our state's attorney's office think about our young people. Really, this goes into our juvenile cases too. The current state's attorney made a very bad mistake when he charged those juveniles with murder. And it's that mindset. We see juvenile cases being upgraded to adult cases way too often. We need to recognize the psychology and the science about what are called emerging adults. I didn't know that term until I became a lawyer, and some of the social science on this has been changing in the last 10 years. But this phrase "emerging adults" is really talking about the fact that 15 to 25-year-olds, their brain is still developing. Of course, your brain is developing before 15 too, but we have to acknowledge that the brain is still developing over the age of 18. And so juveniles and young people, one, they need to be treated as juveniles in our juvenile courts. We need to be very careful about upgrading them to adults. And two, when we are dealing with our misdemeanor courts and our felony, low-level felonies where nobody has been hurt, we need to be watching that young person's record. And that's when we get into expungements. And that's when we get into the discretion that I was talking about at the beginning of the program about the state's attorney's decisions that he or she makes. And when I'm state's attorney, I'm going to make decisions that are focused on protecting our young people. They need to learn from their mistakes, and there need to be consequences, and but they need to be monitored maybe by probation or court supervision. But then they need a chance to be able to take that off their record. And I have to tell you, Dr. Brooks, and maybe a lot of your listeners don't know this, the current state's attorney's office objects to a lot of expungements. They object to a lot of sealing. So even though the law permits the courts to expunge and seal to help these young people, or to help people when they were young, right? Maybe you want to come in as a 30-year-old and say, I made a mistake as a 19-year-old. The current state's attorney's office is objecting to so many of these expungements and sealing, and it's not right. And I'll decrease our number of objections primarily to legal objections, like, sir, I'm sorry, your case can't be expunged under the law. There are cases that cannot be expunged. I think that's when the state's attorney's office should be objecting, because he or she would be doing the will of the legislature who passed the law. But the state's attorney's office now is objecting under their discretionary ability to object. It goes back to that discretion I was talking about. And they'll object on acquittals. So, Dr. Brooks, you could go and win your trial, and the state's attorney's office would still object to the expungement.
Now, so as the state's attorney, he or she has the last word. Right?
Well, they have the last word on a lot of these charging decisions. You know, people think the judges are the most powerful people.
Right.
A judge is the most powerful person within a courtroom and within the decisions that are made in the courtroom. There's a lot of decisions made before a case gets to the courtroom, and there's a lot of decisions made outside of the courtroom. So whether to object is entirely up to the state's attorney's office. How to charge a case, entirely up to the state's attorney's office. What offer to give somebody, entirely up to the state's attorney.
Well, I'm going to give you the 2 minutes just to tell Lake County why you should be elected state's attorney in Lake County.
I've been fighting for my clients for 16 years, and I want to continue to show that same fight and grit and heart for all of the people of Lake County, regardless of class, regardless of race, regardless of background, regardless of gender. We have a current state's attorney that doesn't focus on preventing violent crime. He doesn't focus on helping the people who are suffering from substance abuse disorder, the addicted, the mentally ill. We have a treatment court system in Lake County which is held up as one of the best in the state. And it wasn't started by my opponent. It was started by the judges about 10 years ago. And my opponent's only been in office 8 years, and this treatment court program was started many, many years ago. It needs to be expanded. It needs to be expanded tenfold. Our treatment courts are ways that people can get close, intensive monitoring in their life to help them with their drug addiction or their mental health issues. Dr. Brooks, do you know how many people are being currently helped in those treatment courts? 75 to 100. 6,000 criminal cases are filed every year in our system, and we are helping. Now, other people are getting treatment through regular probation, but that's not always working, and it's that intensive monitoring that we see in our treatment courts that need to be broadly expanded. I want to also confront wrongful prosecutions. 10 years ago, we became the center of the country for wrongful prosecutions, costing taxpayers $54 million. That's $54 million that we couldn't use to make our streets safer, $54 million that we couldn't use to educate our kids. We lost $54 million because of wrongful prosecutions, and the current state's attorney has never issued a public report about it. He has never explained to the people why that culture persisted. And I will have a public report. I'll have a public investigation as to why that culture happened and why it was allowed to persist for so long, so that people can have confidence in this office again. Well,
this fall is going to be real interesting. Like you mentioned, there's no competition. March 17 in the primary, but November is going to be pretty interesting.
Well, I'd love to come back, Dr. Brooks, and talk to you about how the campaign is going. We're doing fantastic. We are leading the county in excitement and volunteers, and we are looking forward to changing Lake County.
Well, is there any hobbies you have at all? It seems like you've been pretty busy.
Well, I've been busy the last several months. The toughest part of it is being away from my wonderful wife Stephanie, and my children are Sam and Teddy. That are 5, so I'd have to list my hobbies right now as Legos.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We've been talking with Attorney Erick Reinhart, the Democratic candidate for Lake County State's Attorney. We hope that you have benefited from the information that he has promulgated to you. This has been Community Focus. My name is Dr. Waddell Brooks Sr., your host.